The Galactic Council chamber floated in the void between stars, a massive structure built by the combined efforts of 47 different species. Inside its grand hall, representatives from across the Orion Arm gathered to discuss trade, borders, and the countless small disagreements that arose between neighboring civilizations. For 3,000 years, this chamber had been the heart of galactic peace. Every problem had a solution. Every conflict could be talked through. At least that was what everyone believed. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Horizon's Edge, watching the blue and green planet rotate beneath him. His crew had been the first humans to make contact with the Valarix Collective 6 months ago. The insectoid aliens had been curious about humanity, asking endless questions about Earth's culture, history, and technology. They seemed friendly enough, though their compound eyes made them difficult to read. The meeting had gone well. Within weeks, humanity had been invited to send an ambassador to the Galactic Council. Earth's government, still adjusting to the reality of alien life, had chosen Lisa Patterson for the role. She was smart, experienced in international diplomacy, and had a calm presence that put others at ease. Jake had transported her to Council Station himself, watching with pride as she walked into that grand chamber to represent their species. 6 months had passed since then, and humanity had expanded rapidly. Colony ships pushed outward, finding suitable planets and establishing settlements. The Artemis Cluster, 3 star systems with habitable worlds, became humanity's prize. Thousands of colonists had already begun the long process of terraforming, building homes and farms under alien skies. Children were being born on those distant worlds. The first generation of humans who would never call Earth home. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning. Earth Standard Time, Commander Greg Hayes commanded the Defense Station Sentinel, positioned at the edge of the Artemis Cluster. His job was simple and usually boring: monitor traffic, ensure colonist safety, and handle the occasional equipment malfunction. He was drinking his 3rd coffee of the shift when the sensors picked up incoming vessels. 15 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They were Valarix designs, sleek and angular. Greg opened a communication channel, expecting a friendly greeting or perhaps a trade inquiry. Instead, the lead ship transmitted a legal document, dense with galactic law and precedents dating back centuries. The Valarix claimed ownership of the Artemis Cluster. According to some obscure provision in Council law, they had filed a territorial claim 300 years ago. The fact that they had never visited the systems, never settled them, and never enforced the claim apparently did not matter. The law was clear, they said. The systems belonged to them. Greg read through the document twice, not believing what he was seeing. He contacted Lisa Patterson at Council Station, expecting her to sort out this obvious mistake. But when Lisa brought the matter before the Council, the response shocked everyone. The Council agreed with the Valarix. The old claim was valid. Humanity would need to evacuate the Artemis Cluster immediately. Any protests could be filed through the proper channels, which would take approximately 15 to 20 years to process. In the meantime, the law must be followed. Lisa stood in that grand chamber surrounded by alien representatives who would not meet her eyes. She argued for hours, presenting evidence that humanity had invested billions in those colonies. She showed them pictures of children playing in the streets of New Portland, of farmers tending crops, of lives already built. The Council listened politely and then voted unanimously to uphold the Valarix claim. That night, Lisa sent an encrypted message to Earth. She described the vote, the smug satisfaction on the Valarix representative's face, and the uncomfortable silence from species humanity had thought were friends. She ended the message with a simple recommendation. Earth needed to think very carefully about its place in this galaxy. The response came 36 hours later. 2 words that would echo across human space: radio silence. Greg received his orders while staring at the Valarix fleet that now surrounded his station. He was to evacuate all human personnel from the Artemis Cluster within 48 hours. No protests, no arguments, no communication with the Valarix beyond basic navigational data. He read the orders 3 times, making sure he understood correctly. The evacuation began immediately. Transport ships arrived from Earth and nearby colonies, moving people and essential equipment. The colonists were confused and angry, demanding explanations that Greg could not provide. He simply directed them to the transports, his face carefully neutral. On Council Station, Lisa Patterson walked out of a session discussing trade regulations. She stood up mid-sentence, gathered her belongings, and left the chamber. Other representatives called after her, asking what was wrong. She did not turn around. She did not answer. By that evening, she was on a transport back to Earth. Across human space, the same scene repeated. Human diplomats left their posts without explanation. Trade ships departed alien ports, leaving cargo undelivered and contracts unfulfilled. Scientists abandoned joint research projects, packing their equipment in silence while their alien colleagues watched in confusion. Commander Nina Ross supervised the withdrawal from Beacon Prime, a research station studying exotic matter. She had worked alongside Thelonian scientists for 2 years, forming what she thought were genuine friendships. But when she packed her laboratory, not one word passed her lips. Her Thelonian colleagues asked questions, made jokes, even pleaded. Nina simply continued working, her face expressionless. The Valarics celebrated their victory. They had used the same tactic on dozens of species over the centuries, exploiting loopholes in ancient laws to claim valuable territory. Usually the victim species would protest for years, eventually accepting a compromise that still favored the Valarics. It was how the galaxy worked. The old and clever took advantage of the young and naive, but this time felt different. The Valarics' first speaker, Kravix, stood in his command chamber watching human ships flee the Artemis cluster. They moved in perfect formation, efficient and organized. Not one ship attempted to resist. Not one human sent an angry message. They simply left, like ghosts fading with the dawn. Kravix felt something he had not experienced in decades, a small flicker of doubt. He dismissed it. Humanity was young, barely a century in space. They would learn to accept their place in the galactic order, just like everyone else. On Earth, Admiral Helen Burke stood in the Naval Operations Center, watching status reports flood in. Every human vessel was returning to human space. Every diplomat had evacuated. The withdrawal was complete and total. She looked at the star map, at the vast territory humanity now occupied, and began issuing new orders. The shipyards received priority manufacturing contracts. Resource extraction increased on every colony. Fleet training exercises began on a scale never before attempted. And through it all, not a single message was sent to alien species. The galaxy wanted to play games with laws and loopholes? Fine. Humanity would play a different game entirely. The silence had begun. 3 weeks had passed since humanity went silent, and the galaxy was beginning to notice. At first, the other species had assumed it was a temporary tantrum, a childish response to losing a diplomatic dispute. Young species often needed time to adjust to the realities of galactic politics. But as days turned into weeks, the silence began to feel less like anger and more like something deliberate. Captain Ryan Cooper piloted his cargo vessel along the neutral trade routes that connected the major commercial hubs. Before the silence, he would have stopped at Port Zenith, a massive trading station run by the Korvaxians. He had friends there, regular customers who always greeted him with warm enthusiasm. Now he flew past the station without slowing down, his transponder broadcasting only basic identification data. The Korvaxian harbor master hailed him 17 times. Ryan watched the incoming call requests stack up on his display and ignored every single one. His cargo hold was half empty, but his orders were clear. No trade with alien species. No communication unless absolutely necessary for navigation safety. He adjusted his course toward the nearest human outpost 3 days away. On Beacon Prime Research Station, the alien scientists were learning what true silence meant. Commander Nina Ross had departed 2 weeks ago, along with every other human on the station. The Thelonians who remained found themselves suddenly unable to access certain computer systems. The humans had locked them out before leaving, taking research data and encryption keys with them. Dr. Venna, a Thelonian physicist who had considered Nina a close friend, sat in the empty laboratory trying to understand what had happened. They had been working on a project together, something that could have revolutionized space travel. Now half the research was gone and Nina would not answer any messages. Venna had sent 43 communications to Nina's personal address. Not one had been answered. The Galactic Council called emergency sessions almost daily now. Representatives stood in the Grand Chamber arguing about what to do. The Valarics demanded that the Council force humanity to resume normal relations. Other species were more cautious, suggesting patience and quiet diplomacy. But everyone agreed on one thing. Humanity's behavior was unprecedented. Ambassador Krell of the Korvaxians stood before the council, his tentacles gesturing in frustration. His species had been trading with humanity for months, a relationship that benefited both sides. Now that relationship was simply gone, cut off without explanation. He had tried to reach Lisa Patterson through every channel available, even sending messages to her family members on Earth colonies. Nothing worked. The silence was absolute and clearly coordinated. Every human, from diplomats to cargo pilots to research scientists, followed the same protocol. They did not argue. They did not explain. They simply stopped engaging with non-human species as if a switch had been flipped somewhere. Lieutenant Sophie Grant sat in a listening post on the edge of human space, monitoring long-range sensors. Her job had become much more interesting in recent weeks. Alien ships were gathering near human borders, not invasion fleets but observation vessels. They were trying to peek through the curtain to understand what humanity was doing behind their wall of silence. Sophie counted 37 different ships from 12 different species, all lingering just outside human territory. They broadcast requests for information, for dialogue, for any kind of response. The human border station simply tracked their positions and said nothing. When ships came too close, automated warning beacons activated. No threats, no explanations, just a simple alert that they were approaching restricted space. On Earth, factories worked around the clock. Admiral Helen Burke reviewed production reports that showed industrial output increasing by 30% every week. Shipyards that had been building colony vessels and cargo haulers were now producing military craft. Destroyers, cruisers, and carrier vessels took shape in orbital construction bays. But the strange thing was that humanity made no aggressive moves. They did not mass fleets at the borders. They did not issue threats or ultimatums. They simply built up their strength in silence, like someone quietly gathering tools before beginning a difficult task. The Galactic Intelligence Network, a semi-official organization that monitored potential threats, issued its first report on humanity. The analysis was disturbing. Human mining operations had increased by 400%. Energy production had doubled. Military exercises were being conducted in every human system simultaneously. But perhaps most worrying was the communication pattern within human space. Human ships and stations were talking to each other constantly, but using new encryption that the intelligence analysts could not break. It was as if humanity had developed an entirely new language just to keep secrets from the galaxy. This level of operational security was typically seen only during wartime preparations. Dr. Maria Flynn, a xenopsychology expert working for the Thelonian government, published a classified report that was leaked within days. She had studied human history extensively, looking for patterns in their behavior. What she found terrified the officials who read her work. Throughout human history, when conflicts escalated, there was always a period of intense communication before violence. Nations would argue, threaten, and negotiate right up until the moment war began. But there was one exception. When humans stopped talking entirely, when they went silent and withdrew, it meant they had already decided that violence was inevitable. The silence was not hesitation. It was preparation. The report spread through diplomatic channels like wildfire. Species that had barely paid attention to humanity suddenly began reviewing their security protocols. Border defenses were quietly reinforced. Military planners started running scenarios, trying to calculate what humanity might be capable of. Captain Ben Howard led a patrol squadron along the human border when a Korvaxian diplomatic vessel approached. The small ship broadcast peaceful intentions, requesting permission to cross into human space to deliver a message. Ben checked his orders, then positioned his 3 ships in a blocking formation. He did not power up weapons. He did not send threats. He simply sat there, engines hot, ready to intercept if the diplomatic vessel tried to cross the border. The Korvaxian ship waited for an hour, sending requests every 5 minutes. Ben and his crew sat in silence, watching their sensors. Finally, the diplomatic vessel turned around and retreated. As it left, Ben noticed his communications officer had her hand clenched into a tight fist. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to say something, but orders were orders. Back at Council Station, the Valerics were beginning to realize their victory might have been a mistake. First speaker, Kravix reviewed intelligence reports from his own operatives. They painted a picture of a species that had unified overnight. Humans who had been arguing with each other about politics and resources were now working together with frightening efficiency. Kravix called a private meeting with his closest advisors. They gathered in a secure chamber away from other species. The mood was tense. One advisor suggested returning the Artemis cluster, arguing that the territorial gain was not worth whatever was coming. Kravix dismissed the idea immediately. The Valarics never backed down. It would make them look weak. But even as he said those words, Kravix felt the doubt growing. Humanity had 17 colony worlds now, with more being settled each month. Their industrial capacity was growing exponentially. And the silence, that damned silence, made it impossible to know what they were thinking or planning. On Mars, Chief Engineer Luke Sanders worked in one of the largest orbital shipyards ever constructed. The project he was overseeing had no official name, just a classification number. But everyone called it the Hammer. It was a vessel 3 times larger than any ship humanity had built before, bristling with weapons and armor. Luke did not know what the Hammer was for. He did not know when it would be deployed or against whom. He just knew that 6 more identical vessels were being built in secret locations across human space, and that scared him more than any alien threat. The galaxy was learning a hard lesson. Silence could be more frightening than any threat. Because when someone stopped talking, you had to imagine what they might be thinking. And imagination, especially when fueled by fear, could create monsters worse than reality. The human silence continued day after day, week after week. And with each passing moment, the galaxy's nervousness grew into something closer to fear. 2 months into the silence, and the galaxy was no longer just nervous. Fear had taken root in a way that surprised even the oldest species. The Galactic Council met in emergency session for the 14th time, and the usual diplomatic courtesy had worn thin. Representatives shouted at each other, something that had not happened in centuries. Lieutenant Sophie Grant sat at her monitoring station, tracking the growing number of alien vessels near human space. What had started as 37 observation ships had grown to over 200. They came from every major species, plus several minor ones that humanity had barely heard of. All of them wanted to know what humanity was doing behind their curtain of silence. The sensors showed something else too. The alien ships were not just observing. They were positioning themselves defensively, as if expecting an attack. Battle groups from 3 different species had taken up stations at strategic points around human territory. Nobody was saying it officially, but everyone was preparing for war. On Earth, Admiral Helen Burke reviewed the daily intelligence reports with growing satisfaction. The plan was working better than expected. Humanity had not fired a single shot, had not made a single threat, and yet the entire galaxy was treating them as a major threat. The silence had done what 1,000 warships could not. It had made everyone afraid, but Helen also felt the weight of responsibility. If this went wrong, if someone misread the situation and attacked, humanity would have to follow through. The weapons being built were real. The military training was real. And while humanity might lose a war against the entire Galactic Council, they would make it incredibly expensive. Captain Julie Morgan commanded the destroyer Valiant Dawn, one of 50 such vessels that had been deployed along the human border. Her orders were simple but strange. Position the ship at specific coordinates and wait. Do not engage unless attacked. Do not communicate unless absolutely necessary. Just sit there and be visible. Julie understood the strategy. Her ship and 49 others formed a grid pattern that encompassed dozens of sectors. To the alien observers, it looked like humanity was preparing defensive positions, but Julie had studied the formation carefully. These positions were not defensive. They were staging points for a rapid offensive strike into multiple systems simultaneously. Whether humanity actually intended to launch such an attack did not matter. What mattered was that every military analyst in the galaxy would recognize the formation for what it represented. Humanity was showing the galaxy its teeth without snarling. On the Valaric's homeworld, First Speaker Kravix was no longer sleeping well. His advisors brought him reports of human ship movements, industrial output, and military exercises. Every report made the situation look worse. Humanity had doubled their fleet size in 2 months. Their resource extraction had increased 5-fold. And intelligence suggested they were building weapons of a type the galaxy had never seen before. Kravix made a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. He drafted a formal offer to return the Artemis cluster to humanity, along with compensation for the colonists who had been displaced. His advisors helped him word the document carefully, trying to make it sound like a generous gesture, rather than a desperate attempt to avoid catastrophe. The offer was transmitted on every frequency, translated into every human language. It included apologies, assurances of future cooperation, and even suggestions for a formal alliance. Kravix waited for a response, checking his communication systems hourly. Humanity's answer was silence. The lack of response was somehow worse than a rejection. At least a rejection would have been communication. This was nothing. The offer simply disappeared into the void, unanswered and unacknowledged. Kravix felt true fear for the first time in his long life. Dr. Alan Pierce, humanity's former scientific liaison, was the last human to leave Council space. He had stayed behind to close out research projects and transfer data. His departure was scheduled and announced, giving his colleagues time to say goodbye. But Alan was bound by the same orders as everyone else. At the spaceport, his Korvaxian friend Ven tried to stop him. Ven had worked with Alan for 3 years, and they had become genuinely close. Ven grabbed Alan's arm, begging for an explanation. Anything. Just one word to help understand what was happening. Alan looked at Ven with real sadness. Part of him wanted to explain everything, to tell his friend that humanity was not planning to destroy the galaxy, just demanding respect. But orders were orders. Alan gently pulled his arm free and walked to his transport without speaking. Behind him he heard Ven crying, a sound that would haunt his dreams for years. The incident was recorded by station security and spread across the galactic news networks. The image of a human walking away from a pleading friend became symbolic of the entire situation. Humanity had shut down emotionally as well as diplomatically. They were treating the galaxy like strangers, like threats, like something to be kept at distance. Commander Nina Ross, back on Earth now, watched the news coverage in her apartment. She saw Ven's face, saw the pain and confusion there. Her own Thelonian colleagues had sent similar messages, asking what they had done wrong. Nina had not answered any of them. She told herself it was necessary, that the galaxy needed to learn this lesson. But late at night she wondered if the cost was too high. The Galactic Council's intelligence division worked frantically to understand human psychology. They brought in experts from a dozen species, all trying to answer one question. What would make humanity start talking again? But every analysis came back with the same troubling conclusion. Humanity would talk when they decided to talk. No amount of pleading or threatening would change that. One analyst, an ancient Drine named Kelith, presented a theory that terrified the Council. She had studied pre-Council history, the dark ages before the current civilization. She told stories of the last silence, an event from over 10,000 years ago. A species had gone quiet, and when they finally spoke again, it was with weapons that burned entire star systems. Most Council members dismissed her concerns as superstition. But a few of the older species remembered different stories, legends that might have been based on truth. What if humanity was following an ancient pattern that the galaxy had forgotten? Human colonies that had been accepting visitors now sealed their borders completely. Station commanders received orders to deny docking privileges to any non-human vessel, unless there was a genuine emergency. Trade stopped entirely. Cultural exchanges ended. Even mixed species families were separated as human members returned home. Lieutenant Commander Paul Brooks managed the border station at New Seattle, one of humanity's largest colonies. A Thelonian merchant ship approached, broadcasting an emergency. They claimed to have engine failure and requested permission to dock for repairs. Paul checked his sensors carefully. The ship's engines were functioning perfectly. It was a test. Paul denied the request and transmitted repair drone instructions. The drones could stabilize the ship remotely, allowing it to limp to the nearest non-human station. The Thelonian captain protested, arguing that human docks were closer and safer. Paul simply repeated the drone instructions and closed the channel. The Thelonian ship sat at the border for 6 hours before finally accepting the repair drones. Paul watched the entire time, ready to act if they tried to force their way through, but they did not. They accepted the help, completed repairs, and left. Another test passed. Another message sent. Back on Council Station, the representatives were running out of options. They had tried official requests, personal appeals, economic incentives, and veiled threats. Nothing worked. Humanity remained locked behind their wall of silence, building their strength while the galaxy watched nervously. Ambassador Krell of the Korvaxians proposed a radical solution. Send a delegation to Earth itself. Demand an audience with human leadership. Force them to either engage or officially declare the relationship over. The proposal was debated for hours. Some species supported it. Others argued it might trigger the very war everyone feared. Finally, they voted. The delegation would be sent. 20 representatives from different species traveling together on a neutral council vessel. They would go to Earth and demand answers. The galaxy held its breath, wondering if this would break the silence or shatter the fragile peace. On Earth, Admiral Helen Burke received notification of the incoming delegation. She read the message carefully, then looked at the calendar. 18 months. That was the timeline they had set at the beginning. Time to decide if humanity would continue hiding or step back into the light. But on their terms this time. Always on their terms, she drafted a response and sent it up the chain of command. The answer came back within an hour. Approved. It was time for humanity to speak again. But first, the galaxy needed to hear what humanity had been doing during the silence, and that would be a conversation nobody would forget. The council delegation ship approached Earth with more caution than any diplomatic vessel in history. 20 representatives from different species sat in the conference chamber, reviewing their speeches and strategies. They had spent the 3-week journey debating how to handle the meeting. Should they be firm? Conciliatory? Demanding? Nobody could agree. Ambassador Krell looked out at the blue and green planet growing larger in the viewport. He had never visited Earth before. Few non-humans had, despite humanity's presence in galactic affairs for nearly 2 years. Now he understood why. Earth was not just humanity's homeworld. It was their fortress. The orbital defense platforms became visible as they approached. Dozens of them, massive structures bristling with weapons. They had not been there 6 months ago. Humanity had built them during the silence, along with who knew what else. The delegation's ship was scanned 3 times before being given permission to approach. Ground control directed them to land at a facility in North America, a sprawling complex surrounded by military installations. As the ship descended, Krell counted at least 50 human warships in orbit. Not old colony defenders, but new military vessels, sleek and dangerous looking. The message was clear. Earth was ready for war. Admiral Helen Burke waited in the conference room, reviewing her notes one final time. She was not nervous exactly, but aware that the next few hours would shape humanity's future in the galaxy. With her were 5 other officials, carefully chosen to represent different aspects of human society. Military, civilian government, science, industry, and culture. The delegation entered the room with visible hesitation. Helen stood and gestured to the chairs arranged in a circle. No head of the table. No position of dominance. Just a circle implying equality. The aliens sat slowly, their various body types making the human-designed chairs awkward for some. Krell spoke first, his translator device rendering his words into English. He began with formal greetings, then launched into the prepared speech. He spoke of concern, of confusion, of the breakdown in relations. He asked very carefully what humanity wanted. Helen let him finish completely before responding. When she did, her voice was calm and measured. She did not answer his question. Instead, she activated the wall screens and began to present data. Files, recordings, documents, all of it showing the last 2 years of human interaction with the Galactic Council. The first file was a recording of humanity's initial contact with the Valerics. The delegation watched as the insectoid aliens greeted human explorers warmly, speaking of friendship and cooperation. Then Helen played a second recording, a private Valerics communication intercepted by human intelligence. In it, Valerics officials discussed how to exploit the naive newcomers, how to use legal loopholes to steal their resources. The delegation shifted uncomfortably. Krell started to speak, but Helen raised her hand. She was not finished. More files appeared. Trade agreements where alien partners had deliberately mistranslated terms to favor themselves. Scientific collaborations where human research was stolen and presented as alien discoveries. Diplomatic incidents where human concerns were dismissed or mocked in private communications that humans were never meant to hear. Helen showed them everything. 2 years of deception, manipulation, and condescension. The galaxy had treated humanity like children, like marks in a con game. Every species in the room had participated in some way, though some more than others. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The delegation sat in stunned silence as the presentation continued. Helen did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The data spoke for itself. When the files finally ended, she looked around the circle at faces showing various expressions of shock, shame, and fear. Then Helen pulled up the final set of documents. Human military readiness reports showing exactly what humanity had built during the silence. The delegation saw the numbers and went pale, or the equivalent for their species. Humanity had constructed enough firepower to fight the entire Galactic Council simultaneously. Captain Victor Hayes, representing the military, stood and walked to a holographic display. He activated it, showing fleet dispositions and strategic positions. He spoke in simple terms, explaining how humanity had positioned itself to strike at multiple systems if war came. Not to win, he admitted honestly, but to make the cost unbearable. The Valarix representative, a younger official named Vrix, who had replaced Kravix after the old first speaker's stress-induced collapse, tried to speak. Helen cut her off with a gesture. Humanity was not finished. Dr. Susan Ward, the science representative, explained what human researchers had discovered during the silence. Without alien interference, human innovation had exploded. New technologies, new weapons, new defenses. The galaxy had been holding humanity back, stealing their best ideas and keeping them dependent. Now humanity had leapfrogged decades of expected development. The cultural representative, Professor Daniel Kim, spoke next. He talked about human psychology, about how humans respond to betrayal. He explained that the silence was not anger. It was decision-making. Humanity had needed time to choose who they were going to be in this galaxy, victims or equals. They had chosen equals. Finally, Lisa Patterson stepped forward. She had been sitting quietly through the entire presentation, watching the delegation squirm. Now she spoke, and her words carried the weight of personal betrayal. She had considered some of these beings friends. She had trusted them, and they had used that trust to exploit her people. Lisa described the exact moment she knew the relationship was broken. It was during the Artemis Cluster vote, watching species she had helped remain silent while the Valarix stole human colonies. Not because they agreed with the theft, but because they did not want to risk their own positions by defending a weak species. That was when she understood. Friendship without courage was worthless. She told them that humanity had stopped talking because words had become meaningless. The galaxy spoke in lies wrapped in diplomatic language, so humanity chose a language the galaxy would understand. Silence backed by strength, fear born of uncertainty, the threat of violence without the waste of actual violence. The delegation tried to respond, to explain, to justify. But Helen raised her hand again. She was not seeking explanations. She was laying out terms. New terms. Terms that would govern humanity's relationship with the galaxy going forward. First, the Artemis cluster would be returned immediately, with full reparations for the displaced colonists. Second, all existing agreements with human parties would be renegotiated under human supervision, ensuring fair terms. Third, humanity would establish a sphere of influence, a region of space where human law was supreme. Other species could request access but not demand it. Fourth, and most important, humanity would be treated as equals, not newcomers, not children, not opportunities for exploitation, equals. Any species that could not accept those terms could consider relations with humanity ended. Krell found his voice finally. He asked what would happen if the council rejected these terms. Helen smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. She gestured to Victor, who pulled up military projections. Not predictions. Plans. Detailed, thorough plans for systematic strikes against military and industrial targets across council space. Humanity would not try to conquer the galaxy. They would simply make it impossible for the galaxy to function. Trade routes, communication relays, resource operations. All of it would become contested space. The council could probably win eventually, but the cost would set galactic civilization back centuries. Was maintaining their pride worth that price? The delegation sat in shocked silence. This was not diplomacy. This was extortion. But as they looked at the cold calculations on the screens, they realized something terrifying. Humanity was not bluffing. Every plan was detailed and achievable. Humanity had spent months preparing not for defense but for mutually assured destruction. Vrix, the Valerix representative, broke down. She apologized repeatedly, begging for forgiveness. The Valerix would return the Artemis cluster immediately. They would pay any reparations demanded. Just please do not destroy them. Helen listened without expression, then nodded. The Valerix apology was accepted, but trust was not restored. Trust would take years to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. The meeting continued for hours. Each species in the delegation had to acknowledge their role in the exploitation. Each had to agree to the new terms. Some did so with genuine remorse, others with barely concealed resentment. But all of them agreed. Because the alternative was unthinkable. As the delegation prepared to leave, Krell approached Helen privately. He asked if humanity had really been prepared to go to war with the entire galaxy. Helen considered the question carefully before answering. She told him that humanity had been prepared to do what was necessary to ensure their survival and dignity. If that meant war, then yes. But she was glad it had not come to that. Krell asked another question more quietly. He wanted to know if humans were naturally this ruthless, or if the galaxy had made them this way. Helen's expression softened slightly. She told him that humans were naturally hopeful, social, and cooperative. But they were also survivors. When pushed, humans did not break. They adapted. The galaxy had pushed. Humanity adapted. The delegation's ship left Earth that evening carrying. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within 12 hours of the delegation's return. The Grand Chamber, usually a place of measured debate and careful diplomacy, erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted across the floor, something that had not happened in living memory. The carefully maintained facade of unity crumbled as species blamed each other for the crisis. Ambassador Krell stood at the center podium, trying to restore order. His voice, amplified through the chamber's systems, finally cut through the noise. He called for a vote on humanity's terms. There was no point in debating. The alternative was war, and everyone had seen the evidence of what humanity could do. The vote proceeded species by species. The Corvaxians voted yes immediately. They had been trying to maintain friendly relations with humanity, and saw this as a chance to salvage something. The Thelonians hesitated but voted yes after a tense consultation with their home government. One by one, species accepted the terms. The Valerix voted last. Vrix stood slowly, her insectoid body trembling. She announced that the Valerix accepted all terms and would begin returning the Artemis cluster immediately. More than that, they would broadcast a public apology across the galaxy. The exploitation of humanity had been wrong, and the Valerix took full responsibility. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in 3,000 years of Council history, terms had been accepted under threat of violence. It set a precedent that made everyone uncomfortable, but nobody could deny the reality. Humanity had forced the galaxy to change through fear alone. On Earth, Admiral Helen Burke watched the Council broadcast with satisfaction. The plan had worked perfectly. Humanity had not fired a single shot, had not destroyed a single ship, and yet had completely reshaped their position in galactic politics. The silence had been more effective than any war could have been, but Helen also felt exhausted. Maintaining the silence had been harder than anyone expected. Humans were social creatures. Cutting off communication went against their nature. Every day she had received reports of personnel struggling with the isolation, of friendships lost, of opportunities missed. The cost had been high, even in victory. Captain Jake Morrison received orders to return to the Artemis cluster. His ship, the Horizon's Edge, would be part of the convoy escorting colonists back to their homes. The journey felt strange. These colonists had left in defeat months ago. Now they were returning as part of a historic victory, but Jake noticed that many of them seemed uncertain, even sad. One colonist, a woman named Rachel Brown, spoke to Jake during the journey. She had left behind friends on the Valerix border station, people she had worked with for months. She asked if those friendships could be rebuilt. Jake told her honestly that he did not know. Trust, once broken, was difficult to repair. The convoy arrived at New Portland, the largest colony in the Artemis cluster. The Valerix had left the infrastructure mostly intact as promised. But walking through the empty streets felt haunting. Homes that had been filled with life were now abandoned shells. The colonists began the slow process of moving back in, but the joy of return was muted. Commander Greg Hayes, back at his post on Sentinel Station, watched Valaric ships departing the system. They moved slowly, almost reluctantly. He received a communication request from the Valaric's commander, asking for permission to speak. Greg hesitated. His orders no longer prohibited communication, but the habit of silence was hard to break. He accepted the call. The Valaric's commander appeared on screen, her translation device rendering her words into English. She apologized personally for the invasion, for taking something that did not belong to her people. She asked if there was any way to make amends beyond the official reparations. Greg considered his response carefully. He told her that amends would take time. Years, probably. But he appreciated the apology. It was a start. The call ended awkwardly, both commanders uncertain how to navigate this new reality. Back at Council Station, Lisa Patterson returned to her post as humanity's ambassador. The Grand Chamber felt different now. When she entered, conversations stopped. Representatives watched her carefully, measuring their words. The easy dismissal was gone, replaced by caution and respect. Or perhaps fear. It was hard to tell the difference. Her first official act was to present new agreements for every major human partnership. Trade deals, research collaborations, cultural exchanges, all of them rewritten with clear terms and equal power dynamics. The Council reviewed each agreement carefully, knowing that rejection was not really an option. But something else happened too. Several species approached Lisa privately, asking to establish better relations with humanity. The Drin Collective, an ancient species that had mostly stayed neutral during the crisis, offered to share historical archives with human researchers. The gesture was significant. The Drin rarely shared their knowledge with anyone. Lisa accepted the offer cautiously. She recognized it for what it was. An attempt to build genuine friendship rather than exploitative partnership. But she also knew that humanity would be watching carefully for any signs of deception. Trust had to be earned, not assumed. Dr. Alan Pierce, the former scientific liaison, received a message from his Korvaxian friend Ven. It was the first communication between them since Alan had walked away at the spaceport. Ven wrote simply that he understood why the silence had been necessary. He asked if they could try again. Build something honest this time. Alan sat with the message for a long time before responding. Part of him wanted to accept immediately, but another part, the part that had been hardened by months of silence and isolation, was more cautious. He wrote back that he was willing to try, but things would be different now. No more assuming good intentions. Everything would need to be proven through actions. Ven's response came quickly. He agreed completely. Trust would be built slowly through consistency and honesty. It was the only way forward. On Mars, Chief Engineer Luke Sanders watched as the massive vessel he had been building, the one everyone called the Hammer, received new orders. Instead of being deployed as a weapon, it was being converted into a mobile shipyard. Humanity would use their increased industrial capacity to expand peacefully, but the underlying capability remained. The Hammer could be converted back to a warship if needed. The message was clear. Humanity was choosing peace but keeping the option of war ready. The galaxy would need to earn humanity's trust continuously, not just once. Any backsliding, any return to old patterns, and the silence could return. But this time, everyone knew what the silence meant. Lieutenant Sophie Grant, still manning her listening post, noticed a change in the alien ships near human borders. The observation vessels were leaving one by one. The military postures relaxed. The galaxy was stepping back, giving humanity space. It felt like a siege being lifted, like everyone could finally breathe again. But Sophie also noticed that some ships remained, not military vessels but diplomatic ones, waiting patiently for permission to enter human space. Species that wanted to start over, build relationships on better foundations. Sophie forwarded the requests to Earth Command and waited for instructions. Admiral Helen Burke reviewed those requests personally. She approved most of them with conditions. Small diplomatic missions, limited access, heavy monitoring. Humanity was not shutting the galaxy out completely. They were just being far more careful about who they let in. The months following the agreement were strange for everyone. The galaxy had to adjust to treating humanity as equals. Humans had to adjust to being treated that way. Old habits died hard on both sides, but slowly, cautiously, new patterns emerged. Trade resumed, but with transparent contracts and equal partnerships. Research collaborations restarted, with clear ownership of discoveries. Cultural exchanges happened, but with mutual respect rather than condescension. It was not perfect. There were misunderstandings and arguments, but there was also honesty. Captain Julie Morgan, still commanding the Valiant Dawn, received orders to stand down from border patrol. Her ship was reassigned to escort duty for civilian vessels. As she left her position, she looked back at the empty space she had guarded for months. The silence had ended, but its echo would remain in galactic memory for generations. On Earth, in a small ceremony attended by only a few officials, Admiral Helen Burke formally ended the silence protocol. Human personnel were now free to communicate with alien species according to normal diplomatic procedures. The news spread across human space within hours, and the response was mixed. Some celebrated the return to normal relations. Others worried that humanity was giving up its advantage too soon. But most people simply felt relieved. The silence had been necessary, but it had also been isolating. Humans were meant to connect with others. Now they could do so again, but with their eyes open. Lisa Patterson gave an interview to the Galactic News Networks, her first public statement in months. She was asked if humanity would ever trust the galaxy again. Her answer was diplomatic but honest. Trust was not given freely anymore. It would be earned through consistent, respectful behavior. The galaxy had taught humanity a hard lesson. Now humanity would remember it. 6 months after the silence ended, the galaxy was still adjusting to the new reality. Human space had become a model of careful diplomacy, where every agreement was scrutinized and every promise was verified. Other species found the new protocols frustrating at first, but slowly began to appreciate the clarity they provided. Captain Ryan Cooper was back on the trade routes, his cargo hold full once again. But the stops he made were different now. Every transaction included detailed contracts witnessed by third parties. Payment was verified before delivery. It seemed excessive to some, but Ryan had learned to trust the system. No more handshake deals, no more assumptions. Everything documented. At Port Zenith, the Corvaxian trading hub he had bypassed during the silence, Ryan met with his old contacts. The reunion was awkward. They asked about the silence, trying to understand what had happened. Ryan explained it simply. Humanity had needed to show the galaxy what they were capable of. Now everyone knew. The question was whether the galaxy would learn from the lesson. One merchant, a Corvaxian named Pell, admitted that his government had been taking advantage of unclear contract terms. He showed Ryan the old agreements they had used, pointing out the deliberately vague language. Then he showed Ryan the new standard contracts his government required, clear, fair, and equal. He said it was better this way, even if it meant less profit. On Beacon Prime Research Station, Commander Nina Ross returned to work alongside alien colleagues. The atmosphere was different from before, warmer in some ways, as people made genuine efforts to rebuild relationships, but also more careful. Everyone was aware that friendships could be political liabilities if not handled honestly. Dr. Venna, the Thelonian physicist, approached Nina on her first day back. They sat in the station's observation lounge looking out at the stars and talked for hours. Venna explained that losing Nina's friendship had been devastating. Not just professionally, but personally. The silence had taught Venna something about taking relationships for granted. Nina listened and then shared her own experience. The silence had been hard for humans too. Cutting off communication went against their nature. But it had been necessary to reset the relationship. She told Venna that they could be friends again, but it would take time. Trust had to be rebuilt slowly, through consistent actions rather than words. They agreed to start small, working together on projects, being honest about mistakes, and respecting boundaries. It was not the easy friendship they had before, but it might become something stronger. Something based on mutual respect rather than convenience. The Galactic Council had transformed as well. The old assumption that disputes could be solved through endless debate had been challenged. Now there was an understanding that some species would not tolerate exploitation, even if it was technically legal. The thousands of old laws and precedents were being reviewed, with many being revised or eliminated. Ambassador Krell led a committee examining legal reforms. He worked closely with Lisa Patterson, drafting new frameworks for interspecies relations. The work was tedious and often frustrating. Every species had different perspectives on fairness and justice, but they persisted because everyone understood the alternative. One proposal they developed together was a transparency protocol. Any species claiming territory or resources would need to demonstrate active use and development. No more ancient claims left dormant for centuries. If you were not using something, you could not prevent others from using it. The proposal faced significant opposition from older species who benefited from the current system, but eventually passed. On Earth, society was processing the psychological impact of the silence. Dr. Karen White, a therapist specializing in trauma, found herself treating hundreds of former diplomats and traders who had maintained the silence. They described feelings of isolation, guilt over abandoned friendships, and uncertainty about their place in the galaxy. Karen's approach focused on reframing the experience. The silence had been a collective act of self-defense, not cruelty. It had been necessary to establish boundaries, but now came the harder work of building healthy relationships within those boundaries. She helped her patients understand that protecting yourself did not make you a bad person. It made you a person who valued themselves. The military began a gradual drawdown. Ships like the Hammer were converted to civilian purposes, though their weapon systems remained accessible if needed. Admiral Helen Burke announced her retirement, feeling that the crisis leadership she provided was no longer necessary. Her replacement, Admiral Stephen Clark, focused on maintaining readiness while projecting a less aggressive posture. But the weapons remained. The defensive platform stayed in orbit. The border patrols continued. Humanity had learned that peace required strength, not to threaten others, but to ensure that others thought twice before threatening you. It was a delicate balance, but one that humanity was learning to maintain. Captain Jake Morrison took command of a new exploration vessel, pushing further into unexplored space. His mission was to find new worlds for human settlement, expanding humanity's sphere of influence gradually. But he also carried diplomatic credentials, authorized to make first contact with any new species encountered. His orders were clear but simple. Be friendly, be honest, and be ready. If a new species proved trustworthy, build relationships carefully. If they proved exploitative, walk away immediately. Do not wait for patterns to emerge. Do not give second chances without clear reformation. Humanity would not repeat the mistakes of their first contact experiences. In the Artemis cluster, the colonies flourished. The returning settlers had rebuilt quickly, and new arrivals were expanding the communities. But there was a memorial in the center of New Portland, a simple stone listing the names of everyone who had been displaced. Not to honor them as victims, but to remember the cost of naivety. Commander Greg Hayes attended the memorial dedication. He spoke briefly, reminding the crowd that the displacement could have been avoided if humanity had understood the galaxy better from the start. But now they did understand, and they would not forget. The memorial was not just about the past. It was a promise about the future. The Velarics had undergone significant political changes. First Speaker Kravix had been removed from power, his health broken by the stress of the crisis. The new leadership, led by Vrix, implemented sweeping reforms. They publicly acknowledged their species' history of exploitation and pledged to change. Whether the change would be genuine remained to be seen, but the effort was notable. Vrix requested a personal meeting with Lisa Patterson, held in neutral space. She came without guards or advisors, just a translator device. She told Lisa that the Velarics had believed they were simply better at understanding galactic politics. They had not seen their actions as exploitation, but as clever strategy. The silence had shattered that illusion. Lisa listened carefully. She appreciated the honesty but remained cautious. She told Vrix that actions would matter more than words. If the Velarics truly wanted to change, they needed to demonstrate it consistently over years, not months. Vrix agreed, acknowledging that trust would take time to rebuild. On Council Station, a new tradition emerged. Every diplomatic session began with a moment of reflection, thinking about the relationships being built or maintained. It seemed small, but it created a space for honesty. Representatives were encouraged to voice concerns early, before they became crises. Communication was prioritized over clever maneuvering. Dr. Alan Pierce and Venn collaborated on a research project studying quantum communications. Their work progressed slowly, hampered by the need to verify everything and maintain clear documentation. But there was satisfaction in the work. They were building something together as equals, and every achievement felt earned rather than stolen. One evening, after a successful experiment, they shared a meal in the station's dining area. Ven asked Alan if he thought humanity would ever fully integrate into galactic society. Alan considered the question carefully. He said that humanity would participate, trade, collaborate, and build friendships, but they would always maintain their independence. The galaxy had taught them that integration without strength was vulnerability. Lieutenant Sophie Grant was promoted and transferred to a new position, coordinating human intelligence operations. Her job was to monitor galactic affairs, looking for patterns that might indicate renewed exploitation or threat. It was not about paranoia, but about awareness. Humanity would engage with the galaxy with open eyes. She noticed something interesting in her reports. Several younger species, those who had joined the Council after humanity's silence, were adopting similar approaches. They demanded clear terms, refused exploitative agreements, and maintained strong defensive capabilities. Humanity had not just changed their own position. They had changed how the galaxy treated all newer species. The older species grumbled about the shift but adapted. There was more profit in honest dealing than in constant conflict, and the military risks of exploitation had become too high. Better to build genuine partnerships than to create enemies who might remember grievances for generations. Captain Julie Morgan, now commanding a heavy cruiser, participated in joint military exercises with Corvaxian and Thelonian vessels. The training focused on coordinated defense,